Welcome to another episode of Joey Awaken Podcast. Today, we're honored to have Hope Reger. Hope's life was forever changed by the tragic loss of her son, but from the darkness, she created a beacon of hope for others. Through her Grief to Hope program, she's dedicated herself to providing a safe space for those grieving to find support, inspiration, and positivity. Hope's story is a testament to the human spirit capacity for resilience and purpose. Join us as we explore her journey and learn how she's transforming her pain into a powerful force for good. Welcome to the podcast.
I am so grateful to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you share with us the story of your son, Justin, and the traumatic loss you experienced?
Absolutely. So in November of 2016, I received that knock at the door that most parents absolutely dread. And at first, I thought to myself, I had two sons. Brian was in his own in our hometown where he lives with his family, and then I have Justin, who was 19 at the time, and I thought, what has he gotten into? Because I saw these police officers, right? And
Hmm.
nothing dawned on my head on that it would be something horrific or something tragic. And so when I opened the door, they asked me who I was, if I was Justin's mom, and I affirmed. And they handed me a piece of paper with a name and number and said, "This person is trying to reach you, and you need to give them a call." And I asked them what it was in regards to, and they had no idea. So
Mm.
I assumed that that meant it wasn't anything tragic, that he had maybe gotten into some trouble, how 19-year-old boys are. And so I thanked them. I shut the door and I went upstairs, and I thought to myself, it's really early in the morning. Who's going to answer the phone this early in the morning? It was around 6:30ish. And when I dialed the number, the person on the other line answered Greene County Coroner. So
Mm.
that is how I found out that my son had gotten into an altercation with his roommate that he lived with at the time. And it was a verbal argument that turned violent. My son did not have any weapons, bats, guns, knives of any kind, but the roommate had a gun and put it to my son's chest and shot and killed him.
Mm.
Now, that's how I found out. Um, as you can
Mm.
imagine, being a mother, right? I was in
Hmm.
shock and disbelief, and the coroner was apologetic, and he was so sorry that he had to do it over the phone. But in our later talking, he eventually met with me at my oldest son's house later on that day to meet me in person. But that is when my whole life completely changed in seconds.
How did your grief journey begin, and what were some of the initial challenges you faced?
So when I first lost Justin, as you can imagine, being a mother and your worst nightmare come to reality is that I couldn't find people that understood. I couldn't find people that I could ask questions to,
Hmm.
or nobody knew what to tell me. Nobody knew what to say to me. Nobody knew, how this thing works with the criminal system,
Hmm.
and on top of that, I had never had anything real tragic in my life. Even funerals were somewhat foreign to me. I
Hmm.
never, of course, had planned a funeral. I had attended, grandparents and those things. But my grief was something that I didn't understand. I didn't know what I was going to expect. I didn't know. I thought, okay, if I go to counseling and I do this journaling and I do all these things that the counselor tells me to do, that this grief will go away, right? Like
Mm.
I'll hit a finish line.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was the first couple months of grief were agonizing, painful, overwhelming, numb. Um, but the worst part of my grief was just finding people that could answer questions, that
Mhm.
understood what I was going through. And that was probably the hardest thing that I had to go through was those initial months of not finding answers to any of my questions. And plus there was the criminal side of everything. So there was a
Mm.
criminal side on top of the grief. So that's
Mhm.
where things um, just really, I couldn't find answers, and it was really
Mhm.
hard for me.
What led you to create the Grief to Hope program, and what is the mission?
Sure. So after the several months I did attend some Christian support programs. That was in a church, and I was angry at God, right? I was
Mhm.
pretty
Mhm.
angry at everybody, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of rage and hatred. And within the criminal trial, or as things progressed, the man that shot and killed my son was arrested that night. He was arrested for murder and ended up bonding out by his parents.
Hmm.
And then before it even went to trial, it goes to a grand jury. So, for those of us that aren't familiar with that, a grand jury basically decides if there's going to be an indictment and then an
Mhm.
actual trial.
Mhm.
So what happened was for me, it never even made it past the grand jury. The grand jury said that because of the way that my son stood compared to where he stood, that he could claim self-defense.
Oh
And so
wow.
charges were never done. He was never indicted. There was no
Hmm.
trial. So on top of all of the grief, now I couldn't protect my son, and now I have no justice for my son. And I was in an ugly dark place, a very ugly and dark place. And I thought this is where I'm going to live, right? This is, I couldn't,
Mhm.
I've lost my youngest. I've lost, you know, all hope in the justice system, in tragic kind of events that happen. And I
Mhm.
thought, okay, this is where it ends. And one day I woke up from a nap, because that was how I gave my mind a break,
Mhm.
was napping. And I slept a lot. And I
Mhm.
woke up and I thought to myself, oh gosh, if I could do one thing for my son that I wasn't able to do in his final days, what would that be?
Mhm.
And I really had to pull myself together and decide how I was going to honor my son in a way that he lived versus the way that he was taken. And so, what that meant, I really didn't know at the time, but I knew that if I stayed in this darkness, people would be okay with it, right? Like
Mhm.
people would say, I get it, Hope. You stay there, right? Because
Mhm.
they don't know how to fix it. They
Mhm.
couldn't fix it,
Right.
right? And I couldn't figure it out, right? And so I thought, if I stayed in this darkness, um, I'm letting my son down. I'm letting him down in
Mhm.
his purpose and his legacy and his life. And so that's when I decided that I was going to honor my son in some way, fashion, or another. And it all had to be dependent on what would be honoring him each and every day, how I could find a focus each and every day, how I could get up every day out of bed. Like it all had to come together. And so literally what I had to do was fight myself through the darkness. And I still have bad days, and I still have great days, and I still have okay days,
Mhm.
but in doing so, I had to create something that brought meaning to my life and to
Mhm.
his. And so over the course of several years, I did a lot of things. I volunteered. I started writing a book. I did group sessions. I tried blogging. I tried all different kinds of things, like paying it
Mhm.
forward. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit in 2020, that's when my purpose of Grief to Hope was developed. It was under the umbrella that we were all virtual at the time, like you and I are today,
Mhm.
and that I needed to help those that are being isolated in grief now, because that added another layer. Like, I couldn't imagine grieving Justin during COVID
Mhm.
in those first initial days,
Mhm.
months, years. So on top of that, we were being isolated. We were counting people deaths on TV. We
Mhm.
were not being allowed to have funerals. We were not having closure.
Mhm.
We were not allowed to say goodbye. All of this was how Grief to Hope sort of came about, where I decided to put pen to paper and I asked God, and I am learning still about God, but I'm getting myself educated. And I
Mhm.
said, what can I do? What can I help with? What can I serve? And literally, Grief to Hope was born. And it's a virtual 7 week program that I've been doing since October of 2020. It's
Mm.
for 7 weeks. And it's just been an amazing adventure that I'm still doing today.
Can you describe what a typical virtual peer grief support group session looks like?
Yeah, sure. So Grief to Hope, we do it in 7 weeks sessions. We start a new one August 1st of this year, 2024. And basically I set the ground rules. I describe, how the rule, how the program's going to
Mhm.
go. We do it for 1 hour because talking about grief can be exhausting. So I
Mhm. Mhm.
really do my very best to keep it to 1 hour. We do it virtually through Zoom, and we have an opening where we'll introduce ourselves. If anybody wants to introduce themselves, they can. No one's required to speak. No one's required to be on camera. You can just listen. And we have a main topic every week. I have a main topic that we discuss. For example, we talk about receiving help. How can you receive help? What helps you? What was the main thing that got you to where you needed to be? What if you had something, what would be your desire for help today? What did people do that wasn't very helpful? What did people do that was very helpful? How do you ask for help? Just a main conversation to open it up. And then we open it up for discussion on anything else that's happening at the time. A lot of times it could be maybe Mother's Day is coming up, Father's
Mhm.
Day, Christmas, any kind of holiday. Um, we allow people to ask if they're having some issue with their grief. They're just like, hey, I want to know how you guys feel about this, or did this ever happen? It's just a live, open conversation. And then I always end with a quote.
How do you facilitate a safe space for grievers to be their authentic selves?
So I love that question. And I've never been asked, I've done a lot of podcasts, over 40 podcasts, and I've never ever had
Mhm.
anybody ask that question. So it's awesome.
Mhm.
So for me, I have to make sure four things happen when I first start a call. One is that I put on there that we do housekeeping, and one of those is we respect everyone's grief. No one's grief is different than anybody else's grief. There's no severity levels,
Mhm.
there's no differences, whether it's a spouse, a child. A loss is a loss.
Mhm.
We respect their religious beliefs, we respect any kind of opinions that they have, and we also respect everyone's privacy. So we want
Mhm.
to make sure that what they say stays in that room, and that we respect everyone's thoughts, opinions,
Mhm.
beliefs, all that to create that safe space. We also ensure that there's no judgment going on. There's no, anyone, uh, pushing any kind of
Mhm.
feelings or opinions on somebody. We say that there's no tech, or it's a tech call. So we need to make sure that if we go down, dial back in. I also talk about this is a peer support group. So nobody in our group is a professional, licensed professional. And I encourage people, if they need additional support, to
Mhm.
look outside that perimeter. This is a peer support
Mhm.
group that just speaks on experiences and
Mhm.
support and encouragement and coping skills. So that's how I create that safe space so people can feel comfortable to take off their grief mask and
Mhm.
be their authentic self.
How has your own grief journey evolved since starting Grief to Hope?
Um, I think one of the greatest things is the family that we've created with Grief to Hope. I started this 4 years ago, and I have people that still join me, even though the program's 7 weeks. You can continue to join time after time after time, and I have some that have joined me since the beginning. I have one lady that was there since day one that still joins me in some of the program meetings
Mm,
today because she feels
mm-hmm.
um, that it's helped her, so now she wants to help others and
Right.
provide her experience and her um, what she's gotten out of the program, as well as how she feels and her coping skills and what she does. So I think um, becoming a family has been the most um, being around others who get what you're going through and understand and know that you can laugh and you can cry at the
Mm-hmm.
same time is really um, imperative. So I think that has in serving others has been incredible as well.
Advice would you give to someone who is struggling with grief and feeling lost?
Um, be patient with yourself. That's number one. One of the things that I had to learn was I couldn't do everything in a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
especially now, as you know, as a business owner too,
Mm-hmm.
like we want to get
Mm-hmm.
everything done
Mm-hmm.
today.
Yep.
Um, and and we also realize when we're grieving that time is so valuable, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we have to value time. It's so
Mm-hmm.
so valuable. And so
It is.
um I think you have to create that grief patience is what I call with yourself. That you're not going to have all the answers, you're not going to know everything, and you have to reach out for help and support if you think you will benefit from it. And a lot of times support doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that you want somebody to fix you. It just
Mm-hmm.
means you want somebody to listen to you and
Right.
to confirm what you're feeling is real. Like for
Mm-hmm.
me, I wanted people to confirm that I was experiencing serious brain fog at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't understand why I wasn't able to answer questions in a fast manner. And
Mm-hmm.
until somebody actually said, Hope, you have grief fog, no idea what that was about. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what are
Mm-hmm.
you talking about? And
Mm-hmm.
they're like,
Mm-hmm.
it happens after you lose someone. And a lot of times people experience even without grief, but it's a place where you just cannot answer as quickly as you used to be,
Right.
and it takes time to build that back. And sometimes I'm still like I struggle sometimes to answer depending on how prepared I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I think um finding support is number two after patience with yourself.
Mm. How do you think society can better support those who are grieving?
We have to talk about it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
ugly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
ugly. Nobody wants to talk about death
Mm-hmm.
and nobody wants to talk about grief. And I totally get
Yeah.
it. I did. I totally get it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is
Mm-hmm.
the problem that when it
Mm-hmm.
happens to us, and I guarantee you, and like right now, one of the statistics I read all the time is 57% of us have lost somebody in the past 3 years. That's 60% of us.
Mm-hmm.
So that means in 3 years, there's going to be another 60%. So I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you, for the most, people are going to lose people. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the family dynamics you have, of course,
Mm-hmm.
will depend on, but you're going to go through this grief thing. You're going to go through it yourself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
your others around you and your family. So we have to start talking about grief as a normal conversation. What do you want when you pass, right? Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to talk
Mm-hmm.
about funerals.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
tell people all the time, grief is not contagious. You cannot catch
Mm-hmm.
grief.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to talk about it,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's what I say to all. We have to start talking about it. And I want to eventually, with my nonprofit, because Grief to Hope is now a nonprofit, and we offer our support programs at no cost to anyone, because I don't want anybody not to get support because they don't have
Mm-hmm.
insurance or
Mm-hmm.
cash flow to do so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But is we have to start putting this in schools. We have to
Mm-hmm.
start giving at
Yeah,
least
most definitely.
The
Mhm.
basics, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It has to be the basics of where you could go to get resources, where you can find help.
Mhm. Mhm.
There are so many grief resources out there. I had no idea until I was actually in this grief community where I'm actually delivering support. Did I find out all this amazing support that's out there? So if we don't talk about it, we don't know how to provide it, right? And so I think we need to start doing it in schools. Maybe not elementary, but maybe the basics in elementary. I don't know, but middle school, high
Mhm.
school, colleges.
Mhm.
Another crazy statistic: 1 in 12 people before they're 18 will lose a parent or a spouse or a sibling. That's
Mhm.
crazy. So
Mhm.
you're talking before they even reach college, 1 in 12
Mhm.
people are losing a parent or a sibling, and we don't even talk about grief in
Mhm.
school.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's one of my missions in Grief to Hope. You know how it goes when you get a nonprofit, you just want to start helping
Mhm.
everybody. Um,
Mhm.
but we have to start. This is, I'm getting on my soapbox. We have to start talking about it. It has to
Mhm.
become normal. And whether it's a conversation after a funeral, after a tragedy, after something like what's happened in the world recently, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
that these things are reality.
Youth mentor, mentoring, the youth, especially nowadays, which is worse, um, with all this crazy music out here and how bad social media is for the youth. They're so confused, lost. So many of them are committing suicide.
Mhm,
The statistics are really high. And
mhm.
it's because it also has to do with grieving.
Yeah.
A lot of them grieve and they keep it bottled inside and they don't speak to no one. Or they think if they speak to someone, they gonna get judged and looked at.
Mhm.
He's crazy or she's crazy for feeling like this or um, talking like that. And we most definitely need these in school.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't realize is that they feel like it's a sign of weakness to show
Hmm.
grief. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, and I tell people all the time, like when you're grieving, when you're a griever, you are more, I mean, you have the strength in you than
Hmm.
most people will ever have in their
Hmm.
lifetime because of what you've gone through.
Right.
Like people will say to me all the time, I would have never made it, Hope. I would have never,
Hmm.
I couldn't imagine. And I hope that you never have to imagine going through what I've gone through. But what's on the other side, and I tell people this, is my son was, I received a gift from this tragedy. And that gift is being allowed to be a voice for grief, being allowed to be a voice for parents of murdered children, being allowed to be a voice for people that um, need to hear that it's okay to grieve and
Hmm.
it's okay to be authentic while you're grieving and it's okay not to be rushed and it's okay not to feel like you have to return to normal because what
Hmm.
happens a lot of times is and I say this all the time to people is we start once we lose something, whether it's
Hmm.
a grief, a death, a
Hmm.
divorce, a job, um a relationship, we tend to want to go back to that normal. I want to just feel normal. I just
Hmm.
want to feel back to normal, right? Whenever we lose these things, these jobs, you just want to go back to that normal life that you had before. And that's when, if you don't go back to that normal life, which most of us will never go back to that way of life, we think of it as a failure. In
Hmm.
reality, it's a start. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new normal for you. And a lot of times it could be even better. Absolutely. Most of the time, something happens in your life that creates a better you. And for me, this tragedy, I call it devastation to determination. This tragedy allows me to be better today than I was before.
Hmm.
Now, I wish to gosh I had my son as I'm a better person, of course, right? Like I
Hmm.
wish I could go back and be this
Hmm.
hope now, but this hope is more patient, more
Mm-hmm.
understanding, more grateful, more authentic, and especially I'm more in the moment than I ever would have been before Justin passed.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when we lose things, and a lot of times it's with griefs and relationships that we want to go back and be that person. But a lot of times that's a whole new start that we
Mm-hmm.
can benefit from. And a lot of times it's better.
You share some stories of hope, resilience from your support group participants.
Yeah, absolutely. With privacy a factor, I won't say their names or anything, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like I said, my first person lost her son in 2020, and she began with me on my very first session. And over the 4 years, she unfortunately lost her husband as well. But
Mm-hmm.
she knew through the things that she learned in the resiliency and how to, you know, dig into that grief, get inspired every day, focus on accomplishing something each and every day, being around others. She was able to, you know, grieve her husband with the same power and strength that she did with her son as she still is grieving. But that's one person that has been with me since day one, and I love her to death. Another person, one of the things we talk about is if you have a magic wand, like how could you get help for the day? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
would you be your magic wand? Like, if somebody could give you, you
Mm-hmm.
know, some help for the day, what would it be? And jokingly around, one of the ladies from the group said she just wanted to be a part of a group, like an in-person spouse group, like something, you know, like they could go out. She was
Mm-hmm.
out of the country. She wasn't in
Mm-hmm.
the nation because we we're global. And she was like, I just want a place where I can go in person and be with others. And so I said, "Why don't you start it? Why don't
Mm-hmm.
you just start it?" And
Mm-hmm.
she was like, "Me?" And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Yes." And
Mm-hmm.
she started it. She
Mm-hmm.
started her own grief group, and it's doing amazing, and she's doing great things. And so that's just one thing. Another lady lost her daughter to murder, and now she's an advocate for gun violence. And she's out there pounding the pavement and living in her daughter's honor because of that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, those kind of things that we talk about is one of the things with Grief to Hope is finding that place you can go to every single day to get out of bed and to
Mm-hmm.
be inspired. And
Right.
once you start to do that, you start building momentum on
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing those one things. That's really cool experience.
How do you balance your own grief with your desire to help others through grief to hope? Because
Um,
I know it's not easy at all.
you
but
know,
you seems like you're doing great.
I have bad days and I have good days,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I say that it's like a heartbeat monitor, you know, like
Mhm.
as time moves, right? You have ups and downs, and you have some really
Mhm.
hills and valleys
Mhm.
in the beginning, and then sort of like a heartbeat monitor. There's lags in between, and those lags sometimes last longer. I still have those days where you know, anniversaries of Justin or his birthday or a song or
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
will impact. Mother's Day is really hard for me.
Mhm.
But what I do is I plan for that day. And so I have something in there, and I tell this to everybody, you
Mhm.
have to have plans for the day.
Mhm.
Because if you don't have plans for the day, what happens? It gets away from you. And a lot of times it's not the day that you want to have. So if you have a
Mhm.
plan for the day, then you're gonna be psyched. You're gonna know what to expect. So if I know it's gonna be a hard day, I usually plan accordingly. Like I will actually dedicate the day for him where I can
Mhm.
allow those emotions to be. I can go to the grave. I can make his favorite meal, or I could go to watch a movie, which we love doing together. I could watch, you know, he loved candy. He was 19 years old and loved candy. I
Mhm.
eat candy
Mhm.
that day. I am
Mhm.
not a sugar person, but
Mhm.
he loved candy. So I
Mhm.
usually pass it out with my grandkids. But
Mhm.
those are what gets me through, is to plan for the day, plan accordingly. And
Mhm.
it's just like your routine. You get up, you brush your teeth, you go work out, you eat breakfast. That's what you have to do. You have to plan that day and make those decisions before it starts to consume you. And for
Mhm.
me, serving others is the best thing in the world. Like, as you know, as what you do, you want to help others. You want to do something that makes an impact. When you start to make an impact on the world, big or small, it could be
Mhm.
you're a dog walker, you're a chef, whatever those impacts are on the
Mhm.
world. Write a book,
Mhm. Mhm.
sing a song, make a song. I don't, whatever you do, when you make an impact, it is so intensely gratifying that you keep wanting to do it. And
Mhm.
so for me, with my grief, as I'm moving forward in my grief and having others with me,
Mhm.
that strength builds in numbers. And then they see the impact that it makes just by a lot of times telling their own stories,
Right.
how that impacts so many others,
Mhm.
that
It does.
it
Mhm.
creates this ripple effect. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so with my own grief, I have bad days and I have good days and I have amazing days and I have really crappy days. But at the end, it all goes to honoring my son in a way that he lived. And now we both live for each other. Like, I
Mhm.
live for him, and I live for his life that he wasn't able to live.
Mhm. What role do you think your faith plays in your ability to cope with loss and find purpose?
So I was really angry at God. Like I said, I was angry at God because I wasn't very educated growing up. We didn't have a lot of church.
Mhm.
I did a little bit of church, but it wasn't ingrained in me as a child or as a
Mhm.
young adult or as a, so I was really, I believed in God. I was angry and I was like, why him? Why him? Why did you take
Mhm.
him of all the
Mhm.
people in the world?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was lucky enough to be around some people that taught me a lot about religion and Christianity. And um, I came to a really amazing place that God has given me a lot of gifts that I never even realized existed. And that there's some answers to things that I'll never know. And
Mhm.
that's okay. Right. And
Mhm.
I have to believe in what I believe and have faith in what's going to happen for me going forward. And so
Mhm.
God plays a huge role in my life, and I'm so grateful for all the gifts and grace that He's given me. And one of the greatest things was someone told me God understands you're angry. And I was like, what?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they're like, he gets it, Hope. He gets it, and he still is here for you. And so when I found that out, I was like, he was okay with me being mad at him. Then it changed my whole perspective. And so faith plays, I have a lot of faith in what's going to be provided for me and what has been provided for me. And I'm so grateful.
What message do you hope your grandkids will take away from your story and legacy?
No matter what the tragedy that happens in your life, that you have to have resilience to keep moving forward. And I know
Mm.
it's cliche to say, knock you down, get up, knock you down, get up. But I truly believe that devastation leads to determination. And I say
Mhm.
that in all my things, because when you're devastated, you have two choices. You can lay down and just give, into that darkness, or you can take that devastation to fuel your fire, to move you forward, to do things that you would never, ever imagine you could possibly do. And trust me when I say this, when I was in the darkness, that I didn't think there was any way that I would ever be sitting here today with a smile on my face, with joy in my heart, looking forward to tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
um, without that. And it's really truly having that focus, that inspiration, and that resiliency to know that you're going to be okay. You're going to have to work your butt off. You're going to have to
Mm-hmm.
work hard at it every day. And I
Yeah.
tell people grief is not easy. It is
Mm-hmm.
not easy. And nothing in life is easy, right? If
Right.
you
Yeah.
really want it. If you really
Mm-hmm.
want it, you have to work.
Can you elaborate on your quote? Grief changes your entire world. It can also inspire you to change the world. How has your grief inspired you to make a difference?
Just with everything that I talk about with grief to hope, to serve, to be there, to make a difference in your community is crucial. um, in your backyard is where you need to start, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Actually, in your house is where you need to start.
Mm-hmm.
In your
Yeah, that's
own
true.
house, yeah. Start
Mm-hmm.
within your house to start making a difference. And once you start to make that one difference in your house, then move to your backyard, then move to your neighbors, then move to your community, and then move to globally. And that's where Grief to Hope is a place where, I just want to make a difference
Mm-hmm.
and people to understand that even in the darkness there's a light,
Mm-hmm.
and that all of us all of us have it within us. And trust me, I am a old lady that has had some difficulties in her life, but
Mm-hmm.
every single time I look back and say that was a lesson that's taught me of how to persevere, to be resilient, to keep moving forward. So if you can change your house, your backyard, your community, you just start with that and start to make a difference. And man, it's empowering.
I'm sure that you will keep impacting and empowering so many people, especially with your story and what you have been through. Knowing it's not easy. Me, I have grieved and still grieving as well, with family members just dying back to back. It's not easy, but you can tell with your resilience and your passion, to help people. I'm sure that a lot of people is going to get impacted and moved. Because you also wrote a book. Am I right?
Yeah, so Grief
So.
to Hope is a book that is out there, and it's a book. Basically, it's my story. It's a lot of
Mhm.
details of from the night that I lost Justin, the details of how I moved through all the past. I wrote it in
Mhm.
22, so the
Mhm.
5 years all through that, how I became, or how Grief to Hope became, what it's all about,
Mhm.
as well.
So where can the viewers and listeners find you? Social media, or you have any Instagram or?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a website. It's grief, the number two, hopesupport.com.
Mhm.
On there, you can find my book. I have a workbook that goes with the program dates. There's testimonies that are on there. Everything, there's all kinds of information on how you can donate if you want,
Mhm.
because we're a nonprofit, as well as the book you can find on Amazon, as well as the website. And then Hope Reger, come and follow me, Grief to Hope on Facebook. I'm on both. I have a public
Mhm.
page and a private page for Grief to Hope. And then Instagram is Grief to Hope 2020. And then LinkedIn, Hope Reger and Grief to Hope. So come follow me. Ask me any questions. You can contact me directly through my website. That email goes directly to me, and I'm really good about getting back to you. I am going to be out doing some national conferences for the next couple weeks, but I usually am right on top of that.
Thank you for taking your time to be on the podcast.
I have totally enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.